Hi, I'm Schadt, CEO of DoubleHorn. Today I'm joined by Bernd Lienhard, CEO of Vorago Technologies. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
That's fun.
We're going to talk a little bit about leadership, Virago, but before we jump in, let's talk about how you ended up as CEO of Vorago Technologies and kind of that journey. Walk us through. You got an impressive general manager, vice president path, and definitely lots of industry experience. Kind of take us through the journey of how you ended up with Virago.
Good point. It feels like actually I started rocking yesterday, but I think I didn't. So it's now 31 years,
Wow.
And I think 31 years now. 27 of them actually as a executive and engineer in the semiconductor space.
Yeah.
And actually it's funny because my time now fairly split between 15, 16 years in Europe, to be precise in Germany, and the remainder here in the US. And so really bring this, what I would call a little bit of a balanced view to the table for most of the guys working here.
Yeah. And so you attended, was it Munich?
I went to Munich, studied in Munich. Electrical engineering.
Yeah.
When I was like actually 15 years old, I already knew I want to do something electrical.
Yeah.
We have a 16-year-old son, and he still doesn't know what he wants to do. So I already knew what I want to do. So I started off after university. I worked 3 years for a big company, a couple of 100,000 employees, huge conglomerate, as an engineer, primarily in the military space. So. Okay. We'll see how this ties into my current role, but I already was fascinated a little bit by that in the past. And then started really effectively after 3 years, starting to dive into more the semiconductor space.
Yeah.
For most people, it's a little bit more tricky because semiconductor is not anything everybody just comes across. So it's a little bit more tricky, but I always loved the kind of technology.
So what were the companies that got you to Virago, the last 3 or 4?
So the biggest one was actually Siemens as a big conglomerate. At that point in time, Siemens had multiple, we'll call it divisions, and one of the divisions was actually a semiconductor division.
Right.
And in the late 90s, I actually started to spin this off and became a standalone company. Went public, was called Infineon Technologies, and that's why altogether Siemens and Infineon, I probably spent about 18 years of my career there.
Yeah, yeah.
And the first 10 years, you're going through rank and file. I did technical marketing, product marketing functions. I did sales. I covered sales for a while before you actually started getting your first executive roles. I actually was one of the youngest executives in Infineon. So
congrats.
I'm still very proud of that all these years.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Virago. You've been there now 3 years, roughly?
A bit over 3 years, yes, 4 years coming. This is a very interesting market. It actually moves a little bit slower, but it's been I'm coming up 4 years now in March, yeah.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit before we started today about kind of the decisions that you had to make to really take the commercial path. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you go back, and the company was actually founded in 2004 by a very smart technical team. So they spent, I would say, primarily the first decade, 11 years, really what I call research and development mode. So really working on the technology, proving it out, but really was more like a research facility. Never really made anything to the market, never had a product in the market. So really I used to call it chasing shiny objects. Yeah. So get some money, get some funding from the government, you chase something, and basically doesn't yield anything, you go back to something different. So there was no really structure in place or any business plan or anything else in place. So really, basically, research and development. Yeah,
and so then you just actually, or not actually, literally just revamped the whole team or a large portion of it.
Actually, we had to. Think about if a team over 5 years, a decade, actually only works in research, it's very hard to turn their minds from researching and being very internally focused. Now go outside and think, what does my customer need? What my audience needs? How are you going to get anything to market? How to make sure people want to buy it? And how do you make sure it gets to the market, gets supported? So there's a whole different mindset in this one.
This is not the R&D mindset.
This is not the R&D mindset. You need your R&D teams, obviously you do, because you want to evolve the technology and what have you, but you need a little bit of a different expertise to do that.
So to commercialize and monetize and so forth.
Totally different mindset. So there is a trend for people just like, okay, I bring everybody along, I just work through this one, but I felt I was running a little bit out of time. So getting the team and actually more from a R&D team now to a commercial strike team wasn't in the cards for me at all. So I basically had to reboot the entire company completely top to bottom.
Well, let's talk now. What's the biggest differentiators in a very complex space, at least for most of us? We look at semiconductors and we say, "Wow," but they're involved in so much, you know. And so, what's the differentiator when you look at a Virago?
A little bit background. I think it would be interesting to also talk a little bit about more what our markets are.
Yes.
So think about modern electronics, the way you find either in your watch or your smartphone or your laptop or any other electronics. If you expose this electronics to radiation, and radiation can mean radiation in space, galactic radiation, or it can mean radiation through nuclear events, for example, as well. By the time any kind of electronics get exposed to this kind of radiation, it typically affects the electronic itself and it goes bust. It doesn't work anymore, it stops working entirely. Yeah. And there are techniques in this industry, in the semiconductor industry, who actually allow these electronics to survive in an environment like this, whether in outer space or in orbit or a nuclear event. And there are traditional ways to actually do this. And Virago's approach to this kind of was completely different than traditional techniques. Our approach was significantly faster and is also significantly cheaper than traditional techniques. So we basically wrapped this around a technology called HARDSIL.
Yep.
And that's basically the prime.
That's your intellectual property.
That's our intellectual property.
Okay.
And what HARDSIL really is, we call it a foundational technology. Think about it, sits in the manufacturing process of these complicated chips, these complicated components. So basically we introduce it into a manufacturing process, and by the time these computer chips going to be manufactured in that technology, they come out and they withstand radiation basically, as well as heat.
So what does it do to the life? Like, just give us an example. It takes something that was dying out at 5 and adds another 5, or is it 5 to 7? That might not be an exact answer to that. That's actually a hard question to answer because, you know, everything is relative.
Yeah. Think about you put something into orbit. And orbit is classified in multiple levels, low orbit and higher orbit. If you put something in a higher orbit and the electronics itself is not protected the way I said it, it typically dies in a couple of days, couple of weeks.
Oh, okay.
So basically you send out a satellite worth a couple of $100 million, send it up, in a couple of weeks the thing starts just degrading, and basically after a while it's gone. It's basically gone. It doesn't communicate anymore, doesn't do anything anymore.
Wow.
So what we do is we actually alter the components they've been using for this one, together with our colleagues in the industry, and they're building these kind of satellites with that kind of protected electronics and protected silicon. And by the time they shoot it up at that altitude, it keeps working. It keeps working for years and up to decades, really.
And do you have am I correct, this might have been early on, but is there currently a strategic partnership in place with TI? Is that right?
We do work with TI, with Texas Instruments here in the US. We have licensed them our technology, and they've been have manufactured components. They sell into the same market as we do. So they're using our technology and basically sell their components and solution based on the same technology.
That's a great customer.
It's a fun customer to have. Yeah. But our traditional customers are more the government entities.
I was going to ask you to elaborate on the spaces.
Yeah. So
well, no pun intended.
I know. It's like a little bit more the government side. So obviously, as you can imagine, in the US, NASA is probably our strongest partner. So they are very interested across the board when it goes to anything in space. We also work with other parts of the government, whether it's the Air Force or missile defense or the Navy. And then obviously you have a whole industry underneath us, which is supporting the government. Or there's alternatives currently. There's a lot of new, we call them new space guys. So these are the startups and universities shoot up satellites to actually do Earth observation, collecting data, and trying to make a business out of that one. So, and we're serving both of these worlds. We're serving the traditional world, the military world, as well as the new space.
All three.
It's a pretty exciting world, but it's a slow-moving market, really.
Yeah. Let's shift into leadership. Question strategy. So you've got a complex product, you've got a licensing model, you have a direct sell model, you've got a distributor relationships. How do you go about rolling out the strategy and a vision for a company that you come in, you take over, you establish a new executive team, and you've got to align folks as quickly as possible to the way you see the end game. What are some philosophies or some best practices you could share with us?
It's not an easy answer, and I don't think there is an answer which fits every model. I think it goes a little bit back on the way I personally think about strategy, vision, and mission. And beyond the classical ways of, you need a market, you need to be differentiated, and you need to get access to this market, and you have a product. I always looked at what I call the emotional state of my customers. And when I'm saying emotional states are there any pain points they're really, really worried about on a daily basis? And looking out in the industry to find solutions to actually get around this pain and this emotional state. I can give you an example out of my previous lives, and it probably illustrates it quietly enough. So I was in charge as a general manager and as a VP of a company who provided processor solutions to the market. And a processor is a relatively complicated product itself. The hardware itself is complicated. Think about it, something which goes in a laptop, a notebook, or any other more processing power needs. And it also comes with a lot of software. So for smaller companies to get a product running, it took them weeks to get they understand the product itself, get the software running, get everything enabled, so the engineers can start working on the actual product they want to bring to the market.
Right.
So it was a pain point when we talked to customers. Said like, it's a frustrating exercise for us to understand this. It takes forever. So our mission at that point in time was defined by we want to get a small amount of customers, a small amount of partners to the market in a relatively short period of time. So the intrinsic value was shorten the cycle time before anybody can actually use the part. In the past, it took them weeks, and we brought it pretty much down to days.
Because this was their biggest pain point.
That was their pain point.
Yeah.
Now looking at this industry, and that's why Vorago comes a little bit more into the game and how we're going to define our mission and vision. Think about this industry, what we talked about, is very hampered on what kind of products are available to withstand that kind of radiation. So think about you, an engineer, a classical engineer who want to build a product. You can't just go out and look into a catalog or go to the web and find the products you need. Yeah. You have to wait basically to find the right product somewhere. So there is a lack of choices. So what we decided to do is that we're going to bring choice to a market which never had a choice, because our technology enables that kind of choice.
Right. Right.
So what I'm saying is, going back to what I said before, you're always trying to find that kind of emotional state in where your customer and your partners are to solve something for them which they're having trouble and challenges to actually get solved.
Yeah.
So obviously you need a product, you need good people. There's a couple of things you need, but for me that was always the hinge point. How do you get into their inner circles to get really going?
What's the hot point that's going to...
What's the trigger point to get this going?
To enable a transaction and move it forward. Yeah, absolutely. So along with vision, strategy, and alignment, let's talk about team building. I find it fascinating that you came in and you had to make the tough decision, right?
That wasn't easy. That was not easy.
Not after a decade of R&D mentality and just switch out the human capital, but you did it and it was successful. How do you get the new folks in line because they're coming from different backgrounds as well in different places? So how do you align the team, and how do you get them motivated and focused?
I think there are multiple ways to handle this one. I think first of all for me it was always like, what kind of people do I bring on board? And we all typically, by the time you fill a role, you typically go what I call a knowledge base. You just look for somebody. Okay, I need to fill somebody who has worked in that space forever and understands the market and whatever. I never really did this. For me, that was never really the prime criteria to bring people on. For me, it's always the capability, what kind of capability that person brings to the table. And when I say capability, I mean a little bit more of complementing elements what I've been missing. And as an executive or even as a CEO, nobody's perfect and nobody is complete. Right. So we always have.
I can attest to this.
Yeah. Here we go. But there's always elements you feel like you can do well, and most of us are aware, like, look, that's not what I can do well, but we need this as a competence. So I always looked at capabilities, but I also felt knowledge. Knowledge can also change. The need of knowledge changes. Let's say you take your company today from a market where we're in into a different market. You don't want to basically lay off your entire team. You want to be confident enough the team makes a transition with you, which has a lot to do with capabilities.
A lot.
So that was always for me the point of focus when I build a new team. It was always about the capabilities.
Yeah.
The second one is also a little bit, where are you in a stage of a company? For example, the stage I am in, it's a stage where there's a lot of seniority needed. There's a lot of years of experience required. It's a slow-moving market, so you need to bring in people with expertise.
Right.
No offense to anybody, but it's probably not the one for a fresh grad in an executive role.
Yeah.
So you bring in people with experience, they don't really necessarily need coaching anymore. They fit right into a mix of your market. So what I'm saying is there is not really a one-fits-all.
It's not a cookie-cutter answer.
Yeah, there's not a cookie-cutter method. Nor is the leadership skills. People kept asking me in the past, so what's your leadership skill? There is not a complete answer. Leadership has flavors because you're dealing with different people. You're dealing with different individuals, and every individual is a little bit different in the way they need coaching or development, and basically bringing them along.
Let's talk about Virago's upcoming in the future and goals. What have you stated the goals? Are they clearly stated for 1920 and on, or?
I think it depends whether you're going to ask me or investors. But I think it's clear there is a plan of significantly grow the company down the road. I think there is a belief that the value proposition holds. I think where this market currently is, there is an enormous amount of satellites going up every single month, every single quarter. It will go. So space exploration, what SpaceX is doing. Yeah. So there's a pull from the market. And it's the same for the government. So the government has a lot of pull currently going into space and developing that capability in space. So I think there is an expectation we're going to just harvest that kind of, growth and plug our capabilities into it to grow with it.
Yeah.
The second one, obviously, is we want to exit the company with a significantly kind of value. So a lot of my thought process is how you can combine getting the growth done, but also make sure that the company has a perspective or a goal.
Yeah.
I always said to my team, if you don't know the direction, every direction is right or is wrong, so it's very hard to follow one. So think about the growth is important for us as well as eventually going to exit, because our investors, as patient as they are, they actually want to eventually see a return on investment.
At some point.
And I don't blame them. It's
yeah, absolutely. What about challenges? What do you perceive as being some of the biggest challenges as you're trying to accomplish what you just mentioned?
I think the biggest one for us was you are entering a market which has been traditionally very conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, there's modern markets like social media, consumer market, which is shifting pretty frequently. New players coming in, old players going out. The market we are playing in is fairly conservative. It's been pretty much the same almost over a decade. Think about when the first satellite launched in the 50s.
Yeah.
It's been the same players, the same players doing the same thing all over again. And we are currently the only really newcomer into a space and really try to break this open.
That's exciting.
You have to overcome this kind of, what I would say, traditional, that's the way to do it. I'm not getting fired doing the same things I've done for decades.
Right.
So you're approaching anything, you bring something cool and new to the table, but in some areas you're not even proven yet. So you need this kind of, I'll call this penguin. The first penguin jumps off the ice and just the rest gonna follow. So our biggest challenge is really breaking the market which nobody has broken in for almost decades now.
Yeah, brand is a challenge, brand awareness,
I'm always calling this the biggest challenge, actually. When you work for a bigger company and a company with a brand name, you just pick up the phone and says, I'm from XYZ, and they, oh yeah, come over.
Right.
By the time we do this, they're like, who are you?
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder for a smaller company to build brand recognition, especially if you're talking to the big guys and also talking to the government itself.
Well, good. Well, thank you. We're going to stop there. There's no doubt you'll accomplish it. You're a fascinating guy. We're rooting for Virago. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.